Okay, so my name is Bill Cooper, as you know, and I'm not sure that my opinion on this matter is as relevant as Kevin's, but I'm going to give it a go. So I've spent 15-ish, 20-ish years sort of working around sponsorship. Originally in a broadcast role, I worked for ESPN for many years, and in that capacity we owned and operated a bunch of properties, everything from the X Games to ATP tournaments to some indoor soccer and some small properties like cricket and English Premier League and Formula One. I was based in Asia, but I think a lot of the learnings are relevant. Really, if I've learned one thing in the last 15 years, it's that whether you're selling a tournament or a team or a big multi-sport property like the Olympic Games or an athlete, a lot of the learnings, or an endorsement relationship with an athlete, a lot of the learnings are the same. Perhaps the scale is different, but the learnings are the same. So I think that's why I'm here tonight, is because I have a vantage point of having worked on a multitude of properties at a multitude of levels, and I still spend quite a bit of time in boardrooms, living through rejection and periodically success of pitching ideas and getting people on board in what are hopefully mutually rewarding marketing partnerships. So in my view, I think I'm speaking to mostly athletes tonight, but to the extent there are team representatives, the same message certainly carries through. So in the case of an athlete, I believe that told well and managed correctly, your story should be able to get you a new bike, if not a whole lot more. And if you're a team, maybe multiple bikes. So in my mind, here is the great efficiency of sponsorship. And let's not get bogged down on what sponsorship is, because there are funny little delineations between charitable giving and philanthropy and all sorts of things. But at the end of the day, as long as we're in this room thinking about how do we engage corporate investment that in return for an investment are expecting some value in return, let's use that as our rough definition of sponsorship, then that's the game we're talking about here tonight. And that's what my comments are meant to be in relation to. So in my mind, the great efficiency of sponsorship is this. At the end of the day, if it feels like you're asking for a favor, it's very likely that you are. But if it feels like you're extending a favor, you probably are. So we don't want to be going out cap in hand. We want to be going out head held high, asking for value in return for value. And that's the great efficiency of sponsorship, because sponsorships and endorsements, well run, do very much deliver value back. I have spent a few years on the other side of the equation. I managed Bell Canada's sponsorship portfolio for a couple of years, and I can tell you firsthand that a few of our sponsorships were like we were being extended a favor, but there were other sponsorships I felt like we were doing a favor. But where it really works, there is true value back. So the question to ask yourself is, which one is more likely to incent generosity or investment into your story? And I think the answer is quite straightforward. Where you're extending a favor, where you're extending value, you're going to very likely get something meaningful in return. And you're going to feel good about it, because it's a two-way street. So to get anywhere in this game, there's no way to start without looking at what you have to offer. And at the end of the day, I think it all boils down to something quite straightforward, which is storytelling. The only reason a marketing entity or a corporate entity would contemplate getting into the game of spending money on anything from a print ad to a radio ad to an athlete endorsement to a team sponsorship to a sponsorship of the Olympic movement is for value in return, to help them sell widgets, to help them move product, to help them enjoy some tangible gain towards an objective they have as a corporate entity. And in order to be able to enable them to do that, you have to know what you have to offer that can sort of propel those objectives forward. So here's what I think to embolden us all with pride, because let's be honest, I've come from a background of the Olympic Games, and I'm still selling the Canadian Olympic team, and just today I was in a boardroom selling Whistler Blackcomb. These are, fairly big, sexy products or properties. And when you're an athlete trying to break through, your property doesn't resonate perhaps as broadly as a mainstream media, but you still have a powerful story to tell. And this is what I want to, a point that I really want to make tonight is that, again, we're not cap in hand here. We have a lot of value to offer. So here are 3 important points to remember, I believe, is that, you know, sports generate passion, emotion, and ritual. We all know that. We all know that when you sit down in a stadium or when you watch your kid, as I did this morning at 6 a.m., struggle through his hockey drills, it elicits a form of passion. One being I didn't want to be there at 6 in the morning, another being that I'm proud, another being that I'd really like a hot cup of coffee, and this one I've got in my hand is cold, all sorts of passions. But on a bigger scale, like it's going to happen across the water on Sunday for the Grey Cup, the passions that are going to be there are going to be tremendous. You've got a home team, you've got team loyalty, you've got phenomenal investment in terms of emotion that have been poured into these teams over the years, so passion is there. Emotion we've spoken to already, but that emotive point at which the consumer engages with sport is something that every marketer in the world would love to harness. They don't all believe they can. They believe it's a little more intangible and challenging than perhaps buying a print ad in the Vancouver Sun, and therefore they reach for the easier solution and buy a print ad. But those that have the confidence to go and try and harness that emotion and succeed move widgets on a far greater scale than those that just simply advertise, because that emotion is there. So you, as a room full of athletes, coaches, and team officials, have passion and emotion to market. You have to challenge yourself of how do you help the sponsor harness those elements. And the other thing you have is ritual. And that's what's so unique, even more so than arts and entertainment, although obviously there's some ritual in arts and entertainment. But what's so unique about sport is it elicits a desire to spend money. I mean, people don't want to go to the game without wearing one of those funny hats, or throwing on a jersey, or again, going to my conversation earlier this morning when I was selling Whistler Blackcomb, you can imagine the number of rituals the planning for a family ski vacation elicits, because you need all these things. So it elicits consumer reaction. So even on your level, when you're pitching what you represent in a community, there's a certain ritual to sending an athlete off to an international competition or a domestic competition, wherever it might be, because you become a source of pride. And there's a certain ritual behind that. And that ritual, if you think about it, could elicit consumer action that directly benefits a prospective sponsor. So passion, emotion, and ritual are critical ingredients, I hope, to embolden you with the pride that you are bringing value to this equation. So, as I was thinking all these big thoughts and coming up with those cool terms, which I thought were pretty cool, this morning I was thinking about it, and I I got this like marketing magazine garbage mail in my inbox. I shouldn't say garbage mail, they send me an update every day, and some of them are really good, but it's like panning for gold. And as I was panning for gold, I came across this YouTube video, which I'm hoping will work.
Hard work, do good. Mr. G. Kennedy, he's pretty great. And he is. Just look at him. See, he's a two-time MVP warrior on the court, /businessman, /humanitarian. What did you done? No, seriously, what have you done? Now's your chance to tell us how great you are. Show us you're doing whatever it is you love to do. Only better. That's Nash. Doing everything, only better. Do it, and you can end up sharing the spotlight with the man himself in the next Nash Riding Water video. Remember this? Show us what you got. And Nash up. Step 1. Make a video showing how you embody the Nashes. Step 2. Log on to VitalWaterCanada.ca for full contest details and upload your picture. Step 3. If you're a vital, tell everyone to vote. That's what Nash will do. Because he's dedicated, driven, ambitious, talented, and powerful. Serious?
So they found a niche with Nash, and that rhymes nicely. You can Google it and look into it in more detail, but it's certainly not an exhaustive example. The idea being that I want to talk a little bit today about like values, which is a sort of a broad and blue sky definition of that. At the end of the day, it comes down to niche. You're going to have to make a connection with who your prospect and target is. You're now, I hope, going to walk into that room emboldened, knowing that you have value, that you can incite passion and emotion and incite potentially ritual that might directly benefit this corporate entity that's across the table from you. But for you to engage with them, you're going to have to make a connection. In the case of Vitamin Water and Steve Nash, I guess they found someone that they thought could be irreverent and speak for their brand in an irreverent manner. And if you know anything about Vitamin Water, it's a very irreverent brand. In fact, I'd take that anecdote even further to give you a further illustration. If you know anything about the rigidity of the Olympic movement, i.e. it's very rigid, and how perfect everything is and how boxed it is, Vitamin Water was the only sponsor of the Vancouver Games that was allowed to tinker with their designation. You know, everybody's kind of like official worldwide partner and they're very formal. Well, Vitamin Water's Olympic designation was BFF. So they're an irreverent brand who play with their relationships, and they found in Steve Nash someone who is willing to make an ass of himself, and that was part of the bread and butter of the relationship. So you have to make that connection. I'm going to touch more on that in a few minutes. You also want to go into that room, and I use the term room, obviously, euphemistically. Wherever you're going to be able to make the connection, you're going to want to make the connection. You might have made it in the back of the room tonight, or you might hope to make it in the back of a similar room in 2 months' time. But when you've got the opportunity to engage with this prospect, what's the homework you will want to have done before you have that opportunity to engage? So here's something to ask yourself. Where does your story fit into the value matrix? Like, make sure that you're realistic in your ask. So as we stand across the water from Rogers Arena and BC Place and other sort of iconic images that connote big partnerships, we ask ourselves, do we, the story that we present, do we draw significant live audiences that can be a forum for sampling or activation? Maybe you participate in a major tournament, but you're not really in control of that tournament, and therefore you can't deliver the sampling opportunity. Do you possess a significant database through which a client can direct market? Maybe you've got some friends. Kevin's going to speak to us a little bit about his online community, so you might have some direct marketing, but is it going to be on the scale of the Canucks season ticket base, or is it going to be on the scale of Whistler Blackcomb's edge cards that's part of my life right now? Probably not. Do you control a significant media channel through which a client can achieve branding or market products? Probably not. You might have a website, you might have some well-viewed videos and through social media, but you don't in and of yourself represent a media channel unless you're a team or unless you're a collective of athletes who is attempting through digital media to amass a channel, but it's probably still not mass, and it's not drawing massive audiences. So let's be realistic then. Because of all those factors, despite the fact that I spent a few minutes earlier emboldening you with that message that you've got value, I'm now going to take a little bit of carpet out from under you and say, well, you're going to struggle to get the attention of the corporate dollar. Let's be realistic. So let's set realistic goals and let's position ourselves appropriately in the value matrix. Because if we're in the right place on the value matrix, then it doesn't matter that we're not drawing a big crowd, because they haven't come into the room or they haven't engaged with you at the wine and cheese social or however you've met the corporate prospect with the expectation that you're going to draw 18,000 every 2 nights. They've engaged with you because they're intrigued by your story. So, having found where you are on the value matrix, then we start to bolster ourselves back up again. So, do we at least have the potential to engage customers with a powerful story? I think so. I mean, I don't think I've ever heard an athlete's story in Canada that hasn't given me a few goosebumps. And I don't mean that to trivialize some of the particularly remarkable ones. But every athlete has a journey, every coach has a journey, every team has a journey that is a powerful story. And the communities within which that journey has taken place and the people that it's impacted, both family and friends, represent a ripple effect, a ripple potential that your story can have, and by doing so, carry value back to the partner. So yes, I would say enthusiastically you have the potential to engage customers. Could you perhaps engage and motivate staff or customers? Having hired on a couple of, at Vanoc we used to have a I don't want to come off as this wealthy person that hires people willy-nilly, but at Vanoc we used to have a silent auction at Christmas to raise money, and through that silent auction there were a number of staff at Vanoc that were former athletes. I think all former, I don't think there were any current. Probably by the later stages there were some current athletes, but they used to put themselves in the draw and say, you know, give a bid and we'll give an hour to your school. So every year I would buy an hour of athlete time and give it to my kid's school, and then I'd always be the proud papa and go and watch the gymnasium presentation. And I can tell you firsthand, and I know you can all tell me firsthand, that an athlete can motivate. An athlete can motivate, certainly can motivate kids, and I know it can motivate staff. I can tell you firsthand, again, I know at Vanoc I was blessed, and I don't want to overstep my bounds there, but we had a number of athletes come into Vanoc to motivate us. And we were already pretty motivated given the cool project we were working on. But I can tell you that it went another level when some of the local athletes came in and talked to us about what it meant that Whistler was primed and ready to host the World, that Cyprus was primed and ready to host the World, that the Richmond Oval was open and ready to go. Like when an athlete told us what that meant to them, it was so much more motivating than just having our senior managers. So you definitely have the potential to engage and motivate staff or customers. Or are you perhaps a community figure, the support of which might generate brand loyalty or affinity? So here's the thing. For sure you're a community figure. The breadth of your community might vary from athlete to athlete, but you're a community figure. And therefore, you're a horse upon whom a client would love to hitch their wagon if they're made aware of the value you represent. Now again, we're managing our expectations. We're putting our value proposition appropriately on the matrix. We're telling our story accurately as to who we are, but we're being proud in terms of what we can present, what we represent as a value proposition, because we can engage, because we can incite loyalty and passion within that community. So that means to me, then, positioned correctly and in front of the right decision maker, your proposition can jump off the page, emphasizing position correctly and in front of the right decision maker, because that is critical. And anybody who's had any success in selling sponsorships or endorsements will tell you nothing Bill has just said for the last 30 minutes or 20 minutes or how long I've been speaking matters as much as getting in front of the right person. So there are certain things you can control and certain things you can't. But just because you can't control who you're in front of doesn't mean you shouldn't do your homework to get ready for the moment you are in front of them. So in order to get in front of them in the right mindset, I wanted to spend a few minutes telling some anecdotes about the 2010 Games, which are, again, on a grandiose scale, I admit, but I think they're representative of the fact that people don't only get involved in sponsorship to get their logo in the ice or on a rink board or on a jumbotron or in a major 30-second spot. There are a lot of different motivations to get involved in a sponsorship. It's not just about telling a client that their logo is going to be big on your tracksuit, and if all goes well, you're going to be on center court for 32 seconds, and therefore their logo will be there for 32 seconds, so it's worth sponsoring you. That's a small piece of the story, but it's not the only motivation they will have. So, as an example, and these aren't, bear with me, they may not be relevant to you, but take these stories in a grain of salt to show, as demonstrative of the diversity of motivations that can be at play when a sponsor considers a sponsorship. Rona, when Rona first considered sponsoring the 2010 Games, you better believe they did not expect they could afford the price tag. I mean, they're not a market leader. They are in Quebec, but they struggle across the rest of Canada. And they're really still finding their way, marketing-wise, in terms of winning market share, especially with the onslaught of Lowe's from the US and Home Depot, etc. So it's a very competitive category. So they were very nervous coming to the table of 2010. But they had a couple of massive hurdles here in Western Canada that they thought 2010 would help them overcome. And I'm not going to stand in front of you here today to say that they were 100% successful. But I am going to stand in front of you today and describe with great authority as to what some of their motivations were. Their motivations for coming into the Games, a huge one was, in Western Canada, the construction community views Rona as kind of a hobby store. You don't get a hardcore contractor popping down to Rona for a box of nails. They go to Dick's Lumber or wherever they go to get their box of nails. So Rona really wanted to penetrate the construction industry. Now I'm massively here. Take me with a grain of salt. But this is just to portray the picture. So they really wanted to penetrate the construction community. So what was happening in great numbers and in great numbers in Vancouver before the games? Construction. So they wanted to use the 2010 games and the leverage it provided to position Rona as a legitimate contender to the construction companies who were looking at sourcing product and services on the various projects in the lead up to the games. And because of the favorable position it gave them in the bidding process by virtue of being an official partner to the games, they weren't given a leg up on the business, but they were given a leg up in terms of timing. If they could be competitive and show competitive pricing, they would get a leg up in all these sort of proposals that were going up. Therefore, it became a huge marketing opportunity for them to set against the construction industry. So you and I, Joe Public, might not have seen Rona appear on our radar screen for a few years after they announced their 2010 game sponsorship. That's not because they were quiet, that's because they were active in a different sector. So that was their motivation. HBC, I think, is fairly straightforward. Their motivation was obviously to move product, but it was also about consumer loyalty. Do you remember that kind of, now I think it's largely a bad memory, the logo they adopted for a while, which was more geometric? They abandoned their coat of arms for a few years, and it was kind of a box with the three colored lines that came out of it. It was kind of geometric. And for some reason, that ownership that came in for that period decided to temporarily abandon their historical Canadian roots, and they went to this sort of geometric design and tried to portray themselves as a new age retail environment. And I'm going to say that branding exercise kind of failed. So the new ownership came in and said, well, why the hell would we forgo hundreds of years of rich history with Canada? Let's go back to our coat of arms. So the timing of the games was a beautiful synergy to allow them to relaunch that sort of brand heritage and enjoy consumer loyalty around it. So their motivation was one of exposure and brand and market share for sure, but you'll see it was slightly different than just raw brand. It was about consumer loyalty and Canadian heritage. Now here's, tech is perhaps the most sort of outside of the norm to get you thinking creatively about what motivates people or entities. Staff engagement. When we first spoke to Tech were curious as to why we would have come to a mining company to sponsor an Olympic Games. I mean, what's a mining brand going to mean to a consumer at a gold medal hockey game? In all fairness, probably not a lot. If you're told at Rogers Arena that the Tech is the mining sponsor of the Canucks, are you going to run out and buy a share in a mine? Probably not. But here's where it worked for Tech. They told us they were having trouble with staff engagement, and therefore, as they went around BC, they were struggling in job fairs to compete with their peers. So they used as a carrot on the end of the stick the prospect to work on smelting the medals, the Olympic medals, to draw staff to their booths. And for a period leading up to the games, they had great traction. They became the most sought-after natural resource company in British Columbia in job fairs. And they got the kind of staff retention they were hoping for out of the games. So these are just sort of they're non-exhaustive stories to show that people have different motivations. So, think about what you have to offer. Get creative in terms of what you're pitching to them. And then remember your value proposition that I mentioned earlier. And remember who to ask. Because there's got to be like values. You've got to make a connection, which I spoke to earlier, and like I said, Vitamin Water and Steve Nash have found a niche. Remember who to ask, because for you, is this a product company, or I'd invite you to think more broadly, an approach to doing business or to managing staff? You know, if they are one of the 50th most, what's that stat that comes out, 50th best employers in Canada, they might have a huge pool of very happy staff. And while you might not be incredibly intrigued by being sponsored by a manufacturer of, I don't know, toilet plungers, you might find that when you go to their staff engagement events, they're incredibly happy staff, and you feel good about engaging with that company because of their approach to doing business. So think about the product, the company, and their approach, and think about whether you'd like to be hanging out with that for a long time. Are you the ingredients to your success and or the elements to your sport a story that might mesh naturally with the product or service or company? So think about it from both angles. Think about it from you. Are you going to be able to get up in the morning and be excited about servicing this sponsor? And are they going to be getting up in the morning excited about seeing their logo as part of your story? If either of these two are forced, then I'll wager both of you will be alone for the slow dance at the end of the dance, because neither of you are going to be that happy with the date, because it's kind of forced. So you got to pursue like values. There has to be some authenticity to the relationship, or the consumer is going to smell a rat, and they're not going to buy a widget just because it's brought to them by a generally unhappy looking athlete who's been forced to pitch a product they don't really want to pitch. They're going to smell a rat. So authenticity is really critical to all of this. Not the least of which, again, because it'll get you out of bed. The best way to sustain energy and commitment to these relationships is believing in them yourself. That'll drive you. So, all of that said, it doesn't, I say it sounds easy, right, but it doesn't, because we know there's a ton of layers. It's not an easy process, for sure. But I think if you're going into it with that knowledge, you're doing your homework, you're going into it with your head held high that you represent value, but not only that, that you're actually going to service value. You're not just going to go in and ask for a contribution and check back with them in a year's time, but you're going to make them an excited member of your family, an excited member of your journey, because you're going to be servicing them, delivering value, because together you've identified that staff engagement, that working in a local community is particularly important, that alignment with the company's foundational activities like Clara Hughes and Bell and mental health, who've identified such an authentic channel through which to communicate their relationship. You've identified this channel and you're meaningfully engaging with it. So at the end of the day, how are we going to put the bread on the table? In my mind, the keys to the kingdom are, sure, there's a few things you can only partially control, which is being in the right place at the right time with the right person who has the right passion. That's more than a few, that's quite a few, but at the end of the day, it's just that idea that getting to the right person. But what you can control is knowing your story, knowing your target, tailoring your benefits, and I've asterisked that not because I footnoted it, but just because it's really important. Like, don't force fit a gold, silver, bronze package of a logo on your speed suit, a logo on your website, and a logo in your mom's Christmas card if that's not what they want. If they want you to appear at 10 staff engagements, or do work for the foundation they work with, or appear at their bank, or engage with a kids league that they're involved with, those are the things you should be tailoring to, not forcing a logo they don't want. Deliver on your promise, make them feel special, and show them some love. I literally sat at Bell and I had team sponsorships that didn't talk to me all year long, and I had team sponsorships that sent me a postcard every month of an athlete on what they were doing. And I can tell you which one got renewals. So I know it sounds trivial to send the postcard, but the love means something. So you got to show it. And in my mind, the special sauce would be, don't invite them to a party and expect them to meet your friends. Right? Invite them in, pour them a drink, adapt a little, maybe change the playlist if they don't like your music. You know, you gotta go with this. If you want this relationship to work, you got to be a part of the equation for sure. The last thing I wanted to talk to, before I hand over to Kevin, is just because I came to this from VANOC, and I don't want to overplay my card, but it's important to the overall movement, which is what I'm going to call staying in your lane. So corporations engage in sponsorship and endorsement to get an edge on their competitor. That's why they do it. They want to tell a story that's just a little bit different than their competitor that's going to help them sell widgets. And if you steal someone else's story, if you say, well, yeah, if you endorse me, then you can come into this tournament and I'll get you full access to this tournament, and that tournament has a sponsor in the same category and those two sponsors beat up on each other, then both the tournament and you are going to lose your sponsors, for sure. So you got to find a way to stay in your lane, which is tough. I don't say that, I don't want to over-trivialize it, but I at least want to remind us of the premise. Because if their competitor can tell the same story, their edge is lost. So be sure to stay in your lane and demand that those around you do the same. So express a voice to your team, to your PSO, to your NSO, and express it up the channel. Because I know I'm representing the Canadian Olympic Committee, and I still have a strongly held view that the Olympic Committee has to stay within its lane. And that lane is a multi-sport story of international competition. It's not a sport-specific story, and it's not an athlete-specific story. If they want one of their partners to tell an athlete-specific story, that partner needs to have both an Olympic partnership and an athlete partnership to tell that story. So you need to be part of that voice, and I will play my part to be that voice, that throughout the channel that is amateur sport, everybody stays within their lane, because I really believe that the athlete, the sport, and the games are all distinct stories. And there is easily enough power and storytelling in that for us all to make hay. And I think the optimal scenario is that an athlete has an endorsement with Rogers, Hockey Canada has a sponsorship with TELUS, and Canadian Olympic Committee has a sponsorship with Bell, and that they all coexist. Because they can. And if they do, then more money has been drawn from the corporate sector for amateur sport than would have been had we stuck with one. So staying in your lane is critically important, but we all got to be on board in terms of respecting each other. Because when runners get out of their lane, it ruins the race for everyone. So when you get it right, it can make a print ad seem stale. It can take a staff retreat from okay to powerful because you're there to make it better. And it can take a company from a community contributor that's a bit stale and boring to really being a citizen. Because at certain points in the calendar, when you're off to a competition, suddenly they jump off the page as being really personal and having a tangible impact in the community. So I'm jazzed about the opportunity in front of you, but I'm not so naive as to think it's not incredibly difficult. So I think it's a great segue to hand over to Kevin.
Thanks, Bill. That was excellent. Are there any burning questions right now? Otherwise, we can hold the questions until after Kevin's piece, and then you can ask questions to both of our panelists. Anything burning? Yep.
What do you mean athletes to stay in their lane? What would you define as that?
Well, I'm going to be really a generalist if I can be, because I think it's the only way to maintain our sanity. So, in my mind, a corporation that aligns with you, I'm assuming you're an athlete? They're telling a story about you and your journey. So they're telling a story that might go from provincial competition to national to international to aspiring to Olympic. But it's about you. It's not motivated just by the World Cup. It's not motivated just by the Olympics. It's that very personal story of being with you and following your journey. So one chapter of that story might be the Olympics. One chapter might be a World Cup. But it's kind of a collective story. Whereas the Olympic partner, who doesn't have rights to associate with your likeness, you might be depicted in a group shot of multiple athletes competing at the games, but you're not solely endorsing their product, because they can only tell a multidisciplinary, multi-athlete story, unless they come to you and ask to as well be related to you.